Hopefully by now you're familiar with the word research processes and you remember the definition that it's basically a process, a research process is a way that you find out. It's a methodology, if you like. And I've already been through websites as a research process. And if you remember, there's all sorts of different types of websites, and you've got to be aware of who's producing a website for what particular purpose. So if you want to revise all of that, go back to step 3 and have a look at that little film using websites. I'm just going to go through all the other research processes that you might like to consider now, because what you're going to do in this step 7, you're going to do your own planning for exactly the most appropriate research processes for your particular topic. Now, obviously, in the olden days, books used to be the only thing. Libraries used to be amongst the most valuable things in the world. Ironically, now, a lot of those books are outdated. But does that mean that you don't search for any hard copy books? Well, no, not at all. There are still some that can be very useful indeed, and they haven't been translated onto the internet. Join the state library, ask the librarians at school. There are all sorts of ways and means of getting hold of all sorts of books. And obviously you can do a search online or even purchase an ebook online. So don't ignore books. Don't ignore books. Now, magazines and journals. Let's make sure we kind of know the difference here, because a magazine can be something like Woman's Day, which is basically a work of fiction. You know, they just make it all up and just take the photos and whatever. Whereas journals can be quite serious, can be quite academic. You know, you get your science journals, your ag journals. You know, they're pretty reliable. Everything depends upon who writes it, for what reason. So your magazines in general are written to entertain, and the good magazines like Time there on the right hand side, you know, they're written to inform more than entertain maybe, but there's an element of entertainment too. The journal articles are more to inform rather than entertain. So you've just really got to be aware of what it is that you're looking at. Now, these are the gold dust, if you like, for a lot of research projects. If you can find an academic report, you know, by an academic who's qualified in your particular area on your research question, it's pretty useful, because the people who write these academic reports and studies, a lot of them spend their whole lives studying a very narrow area, and often many of them are world experts in it, you know. So if there are academic reports and studies, they're a good thing to get hold of. Make sure you know the difference. A study is something that is often an experiment, or at least an examination of a particular, often quite sort of small area in academia, in science, whatever. And they tend to have experiments, you know, ways of doing things upon a particular person or group of people, and then they're reporting back their findings. Academic reports can be summaries of other studies. They're quite useful. And if you've got somebody who is reviewing a whole load of studies and trying to cross-reference all those studies, it's actually called a meta-analysis. They're incredible gold dust for anybody in any particular area. So these are very, very useful. The way to get hold of them is to go onto Google Scholar. Don't be too intimidated. Sometimes the language is really difficult to understand. But this little thing at the top of the studies is normally very useful, because it gives you a summary of what the study is about, and sometimes it's all you actually have to read. Now, online articles covers a whole range of different things in the same way that, you know, magazines and journals cover a whole range of things. I mean, obviously you've got your news, like the Mail, the Telegraph, the Advertiser, etc. online. You've also got, you know, these academic studies online, as you probably know. Just be careful about online articles. As this bottom thing indicates, a lot of these online articles are there to get revenue. And so sometimes what is actually written is more written because it's going to attract people's attention. And so therefore, you can't necessarily know whether the information is reliable or not. And one of the big ways of knowing if something is reliable or not is to trace the references. And some people say about Wikipedia articles, they're rubbish and they'd never sort of look at them at all. Well, some of them are quite useful because you look at the references and you follow the references through and you can see how the Wikipedia article has been put together and you go, well, yeah, in fact, they're using really good sources there. Some of them are just a load of rubbish. So you just got to be careful, basically. Don't forget YouTube. There's so much on YouTube, both good and bad. So you never know your luck. You never know your luck. You might find something useful there. You might be more likely to find useful stuff on the TED Talks, especially if they're done by an expert in your area. In fact, sometimes people have even started off with their research project by looking at TED Talks and saying, well, that's fascinating and I want to follow up on that. So they're really worthwhile looking at. With interviews, now, we've got to be really clear what we mean here. There are all sorts of different interviews. Do you want to call them conversations? Do you want to call them chats? I mean, a formal interview is a question, then an answer, and a question, and then an answer. And you can do these interviews in any format. I mean, you can do the interviews on, you can do them on email, you can do them by phone, by Skype, by face-to-face. All of these different ways of doing interviews have different effects. Because if you do an email question and answer interview, essentially your answers are only as good as your questions, the amount of time that person gives to answering that particular question. You've got no real way of following up on stuff unless you want to pester them. That's really difficult. Phoning them is different, like Skyping. You've got more of a conversation going on there. You can follow up on more things. Some people think that they have to just write out a list of questions and then that's the interview. Well, it's not really, because a good interview is a good conversation. I'll be totally honest with you, the best ones you can have are face-to-face, where you're actually interacting with that person and you're just following your interest, basically, the things that you really want to know. Some people have had interviews by Twitter. Obviously, they're limited. Just be aware that all interviews are really good. We would strongly recommend that you get at least one for your research project, but the way that you do them really makes a difference. Surveys are good. Not everybody has to do a survey. They suit some research projects better than others. There's a separate little film on this. Really go for it if you are going to go for it. Do a good survey. They can give you amazing amounts of information. And last but by no means least, some of you might well be wanting to make something or to do some form of experiment for your research project. And that in itself is a research process, right? So if you research how to make a guitar, that's a research process in all sorts of different ways, and making it is a research project in itself. If you're making a computer, researching how to do it and then doing it is also a research project. So be aware that this is just as legitimate as a research process as, say, looking at websites and everything like that.